In this video, we're just going to talk about exposure in a very basic way. So what is exposure? Technically, it's the unit of measurement for the total amount of light permitted to reach the electronic sensor during the process of taking a photo. All right, what does that mean? It means that basically it's how much light you're letting into the camera through your shutter speed and through the aperture that's in the lens, or through your shutter and the aperture that's in the lens. ISO affects it a little bit, but don't worry about that yet. And that affects basically how much light is coming in, and then it results in how light or how dark your image is. So let's look at an example. So if we look at these exposures, we see that in the center, this is correctly exposed. We have detail in our shadows. We have detail in our highlights. We don't have any areas that are way too blown out. I mean, maybe here is a little blown out and stuff. And we don't have any areas that are so dark, or we don't have tons of areas that are so dark that we can't see detail. So we have dark areas with detail, like down here and down here. I can see the detail in the rocks down there. So this is correctly exposed. The right amount of light has come in and hit the camera sensor. If I let too much light in, it's called overexposed. A lot of times people will talk about blown out highlights. This is so blown out. There's no information there, right? Those pixels are just completely like white mostly in this area, right? I don't get a lot of information. If I don't let enough light in to the camera, then I get underexposed, where it's just way too dark. I mean, yeah, I have more detail in my highlights here, but like this, I could see, like, it would be so much cooler if I could see more details here, but it's just gotten too dark. So again, underexposed is when a photo is not getting enough light. It can happen from too fast a shutter speed or too small of an aperture, too small of a hole in your aperture. So there's just not a lot of light coming into the camera, or a combination of both. So what do? You want to let in more light, either with your shutter or your aperture, or both. So again, underexposed means details are lost in the shadows and darker areas. I can't see any details in these darker areas. Overexposed, the opposite, when you're letting in too much light and it's way too bright. It can happen from too slow a shutter speed or too large of an aperture, or a combination of both, most likely. So what you want to do, you want to cut the amount of light coming into your camera with either your shutter or your aperture. So details in the highlights here are all lost. They're clipped or blown out. Clipped, we talk about usually when we're looking at a histogram, or blown out, we can see, again, we're just not getting any detail in these areas, just blown out white. The correct exposure has a good balance in terms of detail in the highlights. I can see these details in these clouds. They're not just all completely white. And details in my shadows or dark areas. I can see the details of the individual trees. I can see the details here in this dark area in the front, and this beautiful, beautiful reflection. I can even see the detail of the rock in the dark reflection in the water. So that means it has the correct combination of shutter and aperture. So what next? Well, you got to watch the advanced video for shutter speed and aperture and ISO that's going to talk about how aperture and shutter speed work together, and how if you let in more light with one, you can let in less light with the other, and you stop up and stop down stops to let in more and less light to change your exposure to make it the correct exposure. If you have any questions, please let me know, and that's what I'm here for.